It is my pleasure and honor to introduce to you John and Adam Beriault.
Thank you for that introduction. Those very kind words, Uncle Byron. I noticed you didn't mention anything about the speech being optional in your communications with us, so thanks a lot for that, too. I think we want to both start just by saying how thankful and humble we are to be considered for this honor, especially given the past inductees to this Wall of Fame. Looking through the past list, the scale didn't really hit us until we did that, and then saw names like Rudy Wiebe, Joy Kagawa, and a myriad community leaders, scientists, doctors, and politicians. It's truly, I think, the Palliser district has produced a multitude of people worthy of distinction, and that's a testament, I think, to the dedicated work of its teachers, administrators, and support staff over the years.
Growing up surrounded by a large extended family and within the Menno Simons community showed us earlier in our lives what a commitment to service looked like. The faith tradition that shapes the student experience at Menno Simons from when we attended almost 20 years ago, which makes me feel old even though I think makes me feel old. 20 years ago. sorry. Emphasizes that life is not lived only to fulfill one's own needs and wants, but that we are called in the service of others to make positive change in the world as well. Changing the world sounds like a task so large as to be undoable, and I think even more so from the perspective of students. I'll admit it felt pretty undoable a lot of the time to me when I was teaching as well, and I think Adam felt the same at times during his tenure at MCC. But our experiences during our rides both here in Alberta and in Kenya have taught us that world-changing events are often not grand in scale. It took us a long time to realize that what we saw in the efforts of our family and teachers to be of service to others are exactly what it means to try and make a better world. The culture of service and community that was modeled for us at Menno Simons through our teachers and administrators, some of whom are here in the audience today. Mr. Grassmeyer and Miss Epp, I think I saw. 20 years. This has such world-changing potential. We saw daily examples of patience, self-sacrifice, encouragement, inclusion, and faith.
One of the effects of being brought up and surrounded in this kind of community in our formative years is that yes often becomes the default answer when someone suggests something like, hey, why not bike across Alberta to raise money for HIV/AIDS work and peace? Or later, hey, that first ride went pretty well, but why not try it again in Kenya with one of our MCC partner organizations? I certainly cherished my time working at MCC, Mennonite Central Committee, because it was a place where I got the chance to further live out the ideals I was taught at Menno Simons. It's a rare privilege to be associated with an organization that asks, why not, instead of why, which is how we ended up riding across Alberta from north to south twice, and also across the world riding in Kenya with Olympic speed skater Sidney Clausen, our very own Uncle Byron, and 16 riders from different ethnic communities in Kenya, which was certainly a privilege. Both of us, thanks to an early introduction to mountain biking by our grandpa, had been cycling for a long time, and when the opportunity came to combine this passion with a cause we believed in on those 3 cycling tours, we both jumped. There were a great many people, including Abe Jansen and Kim Thiessen, leadership staff at MCC Alberta, Byron, as I said, as well as some of our partner organizations with MCC, Wehenya Jiroge and Joseph Coranto, as well as international MCC staff, Ron and Martha Retzlaff and Michael Bade, who were really instrumental in the planning and implementation of the Kenya and the Alberta rides. It feels a little bit strange to be up here just as the two of us talking about this when I think it was such a group effort, and I suppose the 13 or so people or 16 or so people who were involved, we wouldn't all fit in a plaque or on a picture, but I really feel like they should all be there. Without their energy, skill, and expertise, none of this would have happened, and we're so grateful to have experienced the journey with them.
One of the highlights of the Alberta trips as well as the Kenya trip was interacting with the people that we met, and we met a lot of people on all 3 rides. Often when we neared a community with ties to MCC, we would be joined by local riders, and on our rollout from Lacrete for our second Alberta ride, the peloton numbered in the 20s, which was amazing. We rode with other fundraisers in the MCC bike-a-thons with a huge group of students from Menno Simons that had been following our progress, which was also very rewarding. It's fun to actually interact with the students, and they were great to ride with. And a group of a dozen culturally and socially diverse Kenyan cyclists over the course of 3 trips. And it was this last one especially that left the largest impact on us.
Well, the possibility of a group of 15 or so mixed Canadian and Kenyan riders riding underneath the radar on the back roads of Kenya is pretty slim. This possibility was become totally remote because we had massive loudspeakers on top of the support van, blaring out loud messages of peace and cooperation, information about the rides and the riders themselves and what we were hoping to accomplish. We're pretty sure it was anyway, that's what they were saying, because most of it was either in Swahili or one of the local dialects. So we had to take their word for it. But it was certainly an interesting experience, just having that constant accompaniment on the ride. I think for both of us too, who tend to be a bit on the understated side, it was difficult to realize that wherever we were going, we were making a splash. We would stop in towns and villages and allow time for each rider to speak about their experiences along the ride and how it had been for them. And also, somewhat to the chagrin of the rhythmically challenged among us, many stops also seemed to involve into an impromptu dance party. Trying to explain the whole Mennonites don't dance thing was it was kind of a non-starter.
Speaking with the local people in each area, we heard stories of loss, brutality, and violence. Kenya has a legacy of injustice and inter-ethnic violence left to it from colonial times that still resurfaces, most recently during national elections. We saw and heard people speak of violence and loss, but also of a strong desire for peace and forgiveness. One of MCC's partners, the Lari Memorial Peace Organization, and their then director, Wahenya Njoroge, was a particularly inspiring example of forgiveness and a desire to bring people together. This desire is what prompted him initially to propose the idea of an awareness-raising ride. We were also surprised to hear how, for many, meeting our group of Kenyan riders was one of the few times they had had much interaction with people outside their own community ethnic group. These groups are very insular in Kenya in a lot of ways. This was something we also saw and heard from our fellow riders. For many of them, the 5 days riding together with members of a multitude of different ethnic groups was the longest time they'd spent with a member of anyone outside their group. The relationships that began to develop and the community that we saw forming was inspiring, and it truly felt like we were watching the seeds of something begin to grow. And it reminded us that small acts and events are the beginnings of things that make positive change in the world.
When I asked Uncle Byron for some ideas about what to say during our entirely optional time at the mic here, he said to try to think of a message or a challenge for the staff or the teachers. While John has some experience as a teacher, I personally don't, so thinking of something that might be helpful was a bit of a challenge for me. I do, however, come from a large family of teachers, principals, and educators, and I had a great many wonderful teachers in my time at Menno Simons. Increasingly, though, what I think of when I think what makes a great teacher is of my grandfather, John Schellenberg, and my Aunt Ingrid, both of whom died of cancer earlier this year and who have been on my mind a great deal. Both had patience, kindness, energy, and a passion for knowledge, but never let the specific subject of what they were trying to teach get in the way of the true message that they had for their students. You are special. I care about you. I want to help you grow. I was blessed to have many teachers at Menno Simons who taught me about math, social studies, language arts, and more. But those messages, the messages that I heard and learned, were the ones that shaped my life the most and the ones that I remember to this day. In many ways, the seeds of this ride were planted in John and I during our time at Menno Simons. It is there that we were shown what it means to be a servant, not just to our neighbor across the aisle in the classroom, but across the globe. We were taught to look beyond our lives and be aware of what was going on around in the world, to put our faith into action and to work for justice, to try to break down walls of ignorance, walls of prejudice, by expanding how we define community and how we define neighbor. We were taught to have faith that the small changes and small impacts that a person makes in the world, those small seeds of hope and of compassion that we plant, can multiply and grow into something bigger and greater than we'd ever imagine. And this is an opportunity that you have all as well in working with your students coming up this year.
So our challenge for you this coming year is to encourage your students to say yes when the opportunity to put their passions to use in the service of others is there. Show them that making a positive change is not about changing the entire world, but doing what they can in the world around them. Give them every opportunity to meet people they wouldn't normally come across. Get them out into the wider community and show them that they absolutely have the power to make differences. Give them every opportunity to say yes in working in the service of others. Thanks.